So you knew they were going to raid you that morning?
Definitely.
That morning?
I sensed it. It was coming that morning. We're talking about 17 armored vehicles, a government helicopter, and 2 amphibious units with frogmen. Where I opened the door looking down the barrel with 3 M4 assault weapons aimed at my head. Do you know what they found? Nothing. That's what they found. Nothing. I had no idea that the whole thing would be rigged. I was arrested in January. In July was when they said to me, we can hit you with some superseding charges and you'll die in prison, or you can agree to testify against Donald Trump. Those are your choices. And I said, you can take this and you can shove it up your ass, because I'm not doing that. I interviewed Virginia Roberts Giuffre for 6 hours. The idea that she committed suicide is ludicrous, out of the question.
And she's now deceased.
They tell us that she committed suicide. I don't buy it.
What is your price? Because if your price is not your life, then you are for sale.
Welcome back. I'm here today with Roger Stone. Roger, thank you for being here.
James, great to be with you. We have a lot in common. We're both survivors. We both know how intrusive it is to have the feds smash and attack your place at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes, we do.
And be arrested in your underwear. It's great to be with you.
Great to have you here. I'm wearing a tailored suit today. Alan Flusser.
Very good.
A New York tailor. So I'm wearing a suit in honor of you. I know how much you appreciate fashion.
He was my tailor until I got arrested. And then suddenly he decided to give a bunch of interviews saying that I was a criminal.
I didn't know
This
that.
is after I paid him, I don't know, $350,000 over many years. So he's no longer my tailor.
And is he still alive?
He is still alive, but he's not doing all that great. I now use a guy named Adam D'Angelo, who's an excellent tailor. He comes to you.
Well, the guy that tailored is not Alan. Apparently it's a new person that works for him.
Looks great.
But here we are. So speaking of the FBI, team, let's pull up the clip regarding Roger in Florida. What was this, 2020? What
2019.
Year? Oh, this is CNN. Somehow CNN knew that you were being raided.
Yes.
Let's play this clip and then we'll talk about it.
This morning, a raid video this morning, a really stunning turn of events. So many people who have been charged and in this Mueller investigation have been allowed to turn themselves in, to surrender. Not so this morning. This was, by all accounts, a surprise raid on Stone's house.
Pause.
The reason...
A surprise raid. I know you've talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about my raid. How did they know that you were being raided? How did CNN know that?
Well, it's very simple. I was arrested at 6:16 in the morning. At 6:11, someone at CNN texted my lawyer and said, your client's just been arrested. And he, of course, said, arrested for what? Because, of course, we knew there was no Russian collusion nor WikiLeaks collaboration. So she sent him a copy of my sealed indictment, which wasn't unsealed until 10:30 that morning by a federal magistrate in D.C. But if you looked at the metadata tags on that document, you find the initials of the man who wrote it, Andrew Weissman, therefore the man who leaked it, in violation of federal law, because the leaking of a search or arrest warrant prior to it being executed is actually a felony. Of course, the judge in my case could care less. But the idea that it was a surprise is also false, because I figured it out, meaning the previous day around 4:30, the same producer at CNN called me and said, I want to mail you something. Can you give me your address? And I said, well, you can find my address online. It's easy to find. Well, there's 2 different home addresses for you online. I'm not sure which one is the right one. So I gave it to her on the theory that she could find it anyway. And I said to my wife, they're coming to arrest me tomorrow morning. And she said, well, you've been saying that every weekend for the last 6 months because of the constant drumbeat of stories. It's part of their strategy of trying to pressure you. I never went to the grand jury. I never got a target letter. But every 2 or 3 days, you'd have a new story pop up saying, I was the focus of Mueller's probe, the noose tightens on Stone, the Stone under the microscope.
Were you afraid? Were you scared?
I wasn't afraid. I was angry. Because, I knew that there was no Russian collusion. I knew that their entire narrative was false. But every time one of the people who worked for me and some people who didn't work for me. Some people I hadn't been in touch with for 15 years. All these people were being dragged in front of the grand jury. And of course, their names are immediately leaked. So three more Stone associates go to the grand jury. And I'm scratching my head, as are my lawyers, because we can't think of any crime that I'm actually guilty of or that I could be charged with. So I would say at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I set my alarm. I got up, I took a shower. I put on my Roger Stone Did Nothing Wrong t-shirt because I see a product placement opportunity coming.
Those are your shirts that you produced.
Yes, I was selling them to pay for my legal defense. I was saying them, if you bought your t-shirt for whatever it was, $25.
So you knew they were going to raid you that morning?
Definitely.
That morning?
I sensed it. It was coming that morning. And then I would say about 5 o'clock, I got a call on my cell phone from a Fort Lauderdale police officer who happens to be a friend of mine. And he said, "Are you at home?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "Well, I'm down at Starbucks, and I bet there's, 20, maybe 30 FBI agents here lined up getting coffee. I get the distinct impression that they're headed to your house after they leave here." And I said, "Yes, I'm expecting them." So I was sitting in the upstairs window, which is the only, it's in the bathroom, it was the only window in the house upstairs where you could see the entire front yard. And sure enough, first you saw the red lights. I mean, they came very, very loud, very heavy. You saw the red lights, you heard their sirens, like I'm dangerous.
Right.
I saw them pull a battering ram out. But first, before all of that, James, I saw the CNN crew set up 25 feet from my front door. And I later got an affidavit from a Fort Lauderdale police officer who was called in to do backup. I live on a dead-end street, so they roped off the end of the street. All the media was on the other side of the rope, about a half a block away, except for CNN. They were allowed to be right at right next to my house. And the police officer says in his affidavit, when he told CNN they had to move, he got chewed out by an FBI agent who said, no, CNN had special permission to be, inches away from where I was arrested.
Who gave him that permission?
I presume the FBI did, or the prosecutors. The prosecutors in my case were actually there for my arrest. You realize this was one of the greatest missteps in American political and public relations history.
Helped get Trump elected, perhaps.
Well, it certainly allowed me to finance my legal defense, because if I had quietly turned myself in, and the day before my attorneys had talked to the special counsel's office, we handed over 30 pages of text messages, copies of text messages that proved that I was telling the truth and that the witnesses against me were lying. So they could have said at that point, by the way, we're charging your client tomorrow, just bring him in to the federal courthouse. And I would, of course, done that. But instead, they planned this over-the-top raid.
What do you attribute that overreach to? Overzealous prosecutors, the Attorney General's office? Why did they do it that way?
Well, I think, first of all, they went and misrepresented the facts to two federal judges. So they told two different federal judges, we have probable cause to charge Stone with treason, conspiracy against the United States, counterfeiting, I love that one, money laundering, unauthorized access to a government computer, aiding and abetting a conspiracy before and after the fact. So they got into all my emails, all my text messages, all my phone calls. You know what they found? Nothing. That's what they found. Nothing. So I actually think when they arrested me, they had high hopes that their investigation would turn up something useful.
How did they get into your phone? With the secret warrant?
They take your phone. They took
took the phone.
They took all my electronic devices. So they took my computer. They took my laptop.
Did they have the password, or did you?
They asked my wife for the passcode of my phone. She laughed at them and said, "Are you kidding me? Does your wife have the passcode to your phone?"
Right. No.
So, ultimately they figured it out. And once again, they found no evidence of Russian collusion, no evidence of WikiLeaks collaboration. They found nothing
Let's
useful.
go to the clip of the FBI pounding on the door, Andrew, and then also the clip of the FBI pounding on my door, because it's the pounding sound that I when they did this to me, here it is. The FBI pounding on the door, bang, bang, bang. So at this point, pause. So at this point, what happened?
So I come downstairs to let them in, obviously. And they say, "Are you Roger Stone?" I say, "Yes." They said, "Put your hands behind your back." You're under arrest. I put my hands behind my back. They said, is there anybody else in the house? I said, yes. My wife's in the house. They said, where is she? I said, she's upstairs on the second floor. There's nobody else in the house. I said, no. There are no firearms in the house. I said, you already know the answer to that, because they did. And they said, all right, well, I said, I'd like to know the charges against me, which I'm entitled by the Constitution to know. Well, we'll tell you when we're ready. I said, no, I'd like to know now. I'd also like to see my lawyer. You can see your lawyer when we take you to the booking center in Miramar. Your lawyer will meet us there. So they're running up the stairs, and I realize that they don't know that my wife is virtually deaf. So immediately, remember, I opened the door looking down the barrel of 3 M4 assault weapons aimed at my head, aimed at my face. And it immediately occurs to me that because my wife is deaf, and without her hearing aids, she literally can hear nothing. She hasn't heard any, none of this is going on. She's still sleeping. She sleeps through my entire arrest. My fear is that they're going to wake her. She's not going to hear a command from them, and they're going to shoot her. She doesn't know if this is
that was going through your head in this moment.
Yeah, she's not. They're all in plain clothes. So
did they have vests on?
They had vests on. And most of them had night goggles. This was very dramatic.
This is a joke.
Well, it ended up backfiring, I think, very badly for them. I mean, look, I'm not the most sympathetic figure in the world. Okay, I'm a hard-boiled political operative, but they made me into a sympathetic figure. Today, even today, this was 4 years ago, people come up to me and say, what they did to you, I saw it on TV, it was awful.
That's what they say to me.
Yeah.
They always bring you up to me. And what they did to you. And so did you open the door for these agents?
Of course.
Okay. Because they would have banged it down.
They would have they brought a battering ram up to it. They would have smashed the door in. For what purpose? I mean, the whole thing was ludicrous. So then they handcuffed me. I'm made to walk out and stand in the middle of the street in front of my house. Now they bring my wife out. They perp walk her out in the middle of the street, although she's not allowed to talk to me.
How did they find your wife eventually? Did she walk out into
She is accompanied out by a woman FBI agent. Fortunately for us, they didn't handcuff her. But
did she wake up from the?
She woke up and then she realized what was going on. Now remember, I told her the night before this was going to happen. She just didn't believe me. So they'd taken my phone at that point. They also took her phone. Since the whole world is watching this live on CNN, my grandchildren are calling, my children are calling. Of course,
you can't answer.
Answer the phone. Then after we left for the fingerprinting and the mugshot at the booking center in Miramar, which at that hour in the morning is
what is Miramar for people who don't know what that is?
Miramar, Florida is an hour and a half south of Fort Lauderdale, where I live, and we're at peak traffic time now. So I'm handcuffed behind my back. So I say to the FBI agents, hey, is there any chance we could move the handcuffs to the front? No. Okay, whatever. So we get there. I'm fingerprinted. I'm handcuffed.
It's the first time you've ever been arrested.
I don't even have a parking ticket. I mean, it's ridiculous. So they say, okay, your lawyers are in that conference room. So we go in the conference room. I look around and I go, because I know they're listening. You know they're listening. So they say, okay, well, they're going to, what's going to happen here? They said, well, we're going to go back to the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, where you'll be arraigned. We've already told them you're going to plead not guilty, and they're going to release you without bail. I said, wait a minute. Why did they arrest me in this over-the-top manner if I'm not a flight risk? Their explanation already was, well, we had to do it this way because Stone was a flight risk. James, I had no valid passport. I'm extremely recognizable, and I can't swim because I lived on a canal. We're talking about 17 armored vehicles, a government helicopter, and 2 amphibious units with frogmen pulling up to the dock at the back of my home. Frogmen. They jump out.
I'm sorry I'm laughing, but
they're also armed. I mean, they sent more people to take down El Chapo than they sent to take me down.
When you were in this moment in space and time, you mentioned you were angry. There was no part of you that was fearful or scared or in danger? You didn't have any of those emotions?
I immediately recognized that this was a huge tactical error on their part.
Almost like an advantage for you.
Well, I think it turns out to be an advantage for me because I was able to bring attention to the outrageousness
There's a lot of publicity for you.
And the outrageousness of the case against me. And then, so we go to the courthouse, and that's another drive north now. They put me in a cell with the 3 African-American gentlemen who were just coming around from a bender the night before. So I patiently explained the 1994 crime bill to them and why Joe Biden and Bill Clinton are responsible for the mass incarceration of so many black people. At that point, it's now 10 o'clock in the morning. I've been arrested at 6. I still haven't eaten anything. So I say to one of the guards, hey, could I get like something to eat, anything? And they say, no. So it's already past mealtime. So one of these guys gives me half of his peanut butter sandwich. The other guy gives me half of his. So I have an entire peanut butter sandwich to eat. And by the time I left the holding cell to go upstairs and be arraigned, these guys were chanting, Roger Stone did nothing wrong. Roger Stone did nothing wrong. Was not what they expected, I think.
How did this, because you've been a political strategist a very long time, and you have a lot to say about political strategy, but how did this experience change your approach to political strategy, if at all?
Well, I had no idea that what would happen next would be the complete and total unconstitutional gag, that I would no longer be able to defend myself in any forum or on any platform whatsoever. See, in the early rulings in my case, the FBI was forced to admit that they never inspected the computer servers at the DNC, that they relied entirely on the third-party report of a company called CrowdStrike. Now, in my trial, my defense attorneys wanted the CrowdStrike memo, but the judge would not allow it. And Mark Elias showed up in court to argue that I shouldn't be given it because it would hide the secrets of the Democrat National Committee or would reveal them. Well, the only thing they were proving was that there was no Russian hack. Sean Henry, who just happened to be a deputy to Robert Mueller at the FBI, then the head of CrowdStrikes, admits to the House Intelligence Committee under oath about the same time that I testify that in fact he has no proof of a Russian hack of the DNC. That's because there was none. As soon as I started talking about this, then it became absolutely necessary to gag me. Judge put a gag on me as they had done with Paul Manafort, and I could not discuss any aspect of the case.
Who was the judge?
Amy Berman Jackson, the most corrupt judge in American history. Later, James, we would learn that the jury forewoman, who said in jury selection she had never heard of me, she knew nothing about me or my case, had been attacking me and Donald Trump by name on both Twitter and Facebook for 19 months prior to her being selected as a juror. But she had all that locked down on a private setting, so it didn't turn up in due diligence. And after I was convicted, but this was learned, and it was Mike Cernovich who discovered it, the judge refused to throw out my conviction and give me a new trial, saying that this woman's attacks on me were not evidence of her bias against me.
What happened to Andrew Weissmann? Where is he now?
Andrew Weissmann is in New York. He has just bought the condominium next to his to keep his wine collection. I imagine that he's lawyered up because he most definitely will be charged in the upcoming prosecutions of those who orchestrated this entire Russian collusion hoax.
I'm going to play for you. I'm sure you've seen it, but we'll talk about some of the things in this clip from Westchester County, New York. Go ahead and let's listen to this pounding of my colleagues.
I'm sorry, so what is this regarding?
This is the search warrant. Open up.
Open your hand!
So it goes on, but this was recorded on a hidden camera that was, oddly enough, people say, how did you obtain this? The was a special master appointed in your case? I don't recall.
No.
Special master was appointed in my case because we're journalists. And we got the footage because the special master took all the stuff, and then we were allowed to see some of the stuff that was filtered.
In my case, it was somewhat different. I had security cameras all around my house. When the FBI left, they grabbed the wrong file. They grabbed the wrong tape. So they left me all of the video.
What
of their
was it? A
assault on
door
my
camera,
home.
a door ring camera?
All the way around. Had a door camera, the backyard. I mean, my house was completely wired for security on all sides, so I could see the frogmen jumping out of the boat onto the dock. I could see the 17 cars pull
How
up to the
many
front yard.
M4 rifles did you say?
There were 29 FBI agents, all carrying.
29?
Yes.
What were they
which-
expecting you to have? Like a Scarface?
I think this was about intimidation because you see, I was arrested in January of 2019. By July, they'd gone through all my email and stuff. They realized they had nothing. So Andrew Weissman comes up with this very clever case.
So this is his
This
idea.
is totally him, and a miscreant. by
And
the
he's a
name-
U.S. attorney. What's his
He
title?
was the deputy director of the Mueller probe.
Oh,
This guy has a long history. He gets his start covering up mob murders in Brooklyn. Then he destroyed the Enron Corporation and Arthur Anderson. His criminal convictions in those cases are reversed 9-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court. Yet to this day, he still points to them as the gold standard of federal prosecutions. Then he destroyed all the evidence of the illegal actions by the Mueller investigators. So after special counsel John Durham puts out a subpoena for the cell phones of the Mueller investigators, Andrew Weissman is the one who wipes all the memory of them. You see, there are two sets of rules. They can do whatever they want. Now, they would later accuse me of destroying evidence. I destroyed nothing. I turned over 1 million emails to them. I never deleted anything. There's no evidence of Russian collusion. Here's the most amazing thing. My lawyers asked for Robert Mueller's final report, because the sections about me are completely redacted in the copy they gave us. We wanted an unredacted report. The judge said, no, you can't have it. I'll review the report in my chambers and I'll give you the sections relevant to you. James, she seemed to have forgotten page 178. It's the page in which he says that the barriers to prosecuting Stone are factual, meaning they found no evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other crime. Somehow the judge forgot to give us that section. That's the withholding of exculpatory evidence. I suspect when the House Republicans very shortly file articles of impeachment against this judge, which are definitely coming, that will be one of the items delineated in those articles. Now, can you impeach a federal judge? Takes 2/3 vote in the Senate. It's difficult, but we should have a trial.
Wiseman was probably in charge because he reported to Mueller.
Yes.
And Mueller wasn't all there.
Weissman was the de facto head of this witch hunt. This is a guy, just to be clear, in the Enron case, he took the CFO of Enron. He locked him in a casket-style metal box with just a slot for his eyes and left him out in the sun until he agreed to testify and say what Weissman wanted him to say. There was a bar complaint filed in New York on this matter because that's cruel and unusual. Go look for that bar complaint, James. It's missing. It's gone. It's no longer there.
This is a sick person. A lot of people have been, by the way, we have the clip, Andrew, of Stone walking back into the house with a shirt that says Roger Stone did nothing wrong. I'd like to see that. This is Sinclair Broadcast Group. I guess they published this. You walking back into the house. Is it January 25th, 2019? Is that the
is
correct
correct.
date?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Roger Stone did nothing wrong. Walking back in.
Now that's product placement.
That's product placement.
I sold 15,000 of those shirts in the next 24 hours. All of it dedicated to my legal defense fund.
I mean, seriously, a lot of people have been through this in some way, matter, shape, or form and relate to it in some local or federal form. And what advice would you have for people who go through it? Who are scared, who are afraid?
Well, in that moment, of course, it's very, very intimidating. I admit to you that my initial reaction was, this is ridiculous. There's no crime here. I'll clearly be found innocent. I had no idea that I was going to be subjected to a Soviet-style show trial in which all avenues or arguments in defense were denied. You can't. So I wanted to bring in Bill Binney, the CIA's most famous IT guy, who could have proved there was no online hack of the DNC. The judge would not allow him to testify. One of the charges against me was I had said that a friend of mine in New York, who was a a radio personality, had told me that he knew a woman lawyer who worked for WikiLeaks and that she had told him that Julian Assange had this huge catch of information on Hillary Clinton and he would release it in October. James, I have the text message in which he told me that. The judge would not allow us to enter it as evidence because it disproved one of the specific charges against me. So I had no idea that the whole thing would be rigged, but I realized ultimately why it was. I was arrested in January. In July was when they said to me, through my lawyers, look, we can hit you with some superseding charges and you'll die in prison, or you can agree to testify against Donald Trump. Those are your choices. And the guy pushes this piece of paper across. He says, all you got to do is sign this. I look at it. I realize every word of it's false. And I said, you can take this and you can shove it up your ass because I'm not doing that. Now, I'd already passed 2 polygraph tests that proved that everything they wanted me to say was false. So they wanted me to be the ham in their ham sandwich. I refused to do it. I was not going to be Michael Cohen. I was not going to lie. I was not going to say things that weren't true.
You're not going to. I remember you saying, "I will not bear false witness."
I wouldn't. That's what they wanted me to do.
Stuck with me because a lot of people do that.
Sure, it would be the easy way out. They're giving me the easy way out. Look, we'll tell the judge to give you no jail time. All you got to do is sign this.
Plead guilty to something you didn't do.
Right. I wouldn't even have had to plead guilty. At that point, they would have just theoretically told the judge not to give me jail time. Now, they double-crossed Cohen. They would have double-crossed me too had I agreed to testify against Trump, but I was never going to do that. First of all, how would you look yourself in the mirror? I wanted Donald Trump to be president since 1988. I tried to get him run in 2000. I tried to get him to run in 2012. I finally succeeded in getting him to run in 2016. Not me and other people. So I was going to turn on this guy who I'd known at that point for 40 years, who I always dreamed about being a great president. There was never any chance that I was going to do that. And then everything I would have said would have been a lie. I would have had to make it up. In other words, you have Hakeem Jeffries, who has this famous tweet that claims that I traded my pardon for silence regarding the crimes of Donald Trump. Now, if Hakeem will just waive his congressional immunity, I'll sue him. But we both know he's not going to do that.
I think a lot of people may plead guilty to things they don't do because they can't afford to pay attorneys. That seems to be a stressing point. How much did it cost you? This whole thing cost you personally?
Well,
and
first of all, recognize that we lost our home. We lost our savings. We lost our insurance. I lost my car. I had to sell my electric guitar. That was very painful. I sold everything I had, essentially, but then I still ran out of money.
To pay attorneys.
And to live. Because remember, if you're gagged, you can't speak, you can't write. That's how I make a living. So I had no ability to make a living. And of course, no one wants to hire you for strategic consulting because you're under criminal indictment. So I raised roughly $3.5 million for my legal defense. I worked very, very hard to do it. I went literally from speaking to the prestigious Oxford Political Union in London to speaking at a gentleman's club in Kentucky, signing women's asses for $50 for my legal defense fund.
I mean, and what I endure and experience in my life is just the constant litigation, constant defense costs, dealing with lawyers. Do you have any advice on that?
It's endless. First of all, I had 13 civil cases filed against me, all of them baseless, all of them meritless.
On the same cause of action?
The same cause of action. Well, first of all, some Obama front group, Democracy Now!, some BS group, sued me in a civil case claiming that I had been involved with WikiLeaks. Their proof, a clipping from the Huffington Post. That's not proof. That's an accusation. So kind of like the Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian collusion. This is a complete crock of shit. All they did was cut and paste out of the Huffington Post or the Daily Beast some accusation. That's not proof. That's just an accusation. And they call it a report as if it's proof. It's proof of nothing whatsoever. There is no Russian collusion. There is no collaboration on my part with WikiLeaks. And there is no Russian hack of the DNC. And as you may now know, Tulsi Gabbard declassified documents just this past week that shows that there was no hack of the DNC. And when Admiral Mike Rogers tried to say that, Clapper said, no, we all got to stick to the same story. It was a lie.
Is
still
that
a lie.
The same Clapper that said under oath while he was rubbing his face that we don't spy on Americans.
Right. There is no data collection, metadata collection program in Americans. And then Edward Snowden proved that was a lie. But where did Clapper go after he left the government? He was teaching ethics at Vermont College.
You can't make that up. You can't make that. Do you think these people are going to be prosecuted, held accountable?
I do.
At some point.
I think relatively soon. I think the American people demand it. I think the president's base demands it. Something General Flynn and I and Rudy Giuliani have talked about very extensively. I don't know that it'll be as broad as it needs to be, but certainly Brennan, Clapper, Comey, I think Hillary herself, frankly, should be prosecuted. I'll be surprised if that happens. Obama may have immunity. I agree with those who say that he could still be impeached, even though he's no longer president, and then he would lose that immunity. On the other hand, I don't think 2/3 of the Senate would vote to impeach him, even though I think he's, on the facts, he's impeachable. But Joe Biden should certainly be charged because he has no immunity for the crimes he committed as vice president. He has no immunity for the financial crimes he committed as vice president, but he has no immunity for the crimes he committed in the furtherance of the seditious conspiracy that is Russiagate. Here's the important thing. This conspiracy doesn't stop in 2017. It starts in 2016, it continues in 2017, it continues in 2020, and it continues in 2024. So the raid on Mar-a-Lago is yet another step in the same seditious conspiracy, which is why the trials can be held in South Florida, where these people will be indicted and stand trial in South Florida, not in Washington, D.C., where you cannot get a fair-minded judge and you cannot get a reasonable jury.
The jury is the concern in D.C.
Well, it's also the judges. Every one of these judges, the main judge is now retired, but she's epically corrupt. The judge in my case, the judge in General Flynn's case. It's interesting. After my conviction, 3 different jurors, while being interviewed, all say, and the judge never visited the jury room. Why would they say that?
The judge never visited the jury room.
Right. Jury by law, the judge cannot visit the jury room during deliberations. Why would you volunteer that she never did that? Interesting.
Did you sit through voir dire jury selection in your case?
Yeah, but it was a joke because the judge ruled that working for Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama or previous service in the Clinton or Obama administrations was not, or being a critic of Roger Stone's, none of those things were barriers to be on this jury.
Right. Yeah, and the preemptory strikes, and I was in D.C. for my jury trial, and jurors seemed to lie under oath, but there was nothing I could do about it.
Oh, yeah,
nothing
absolutely.
we could do about it. And so
they would say, I hate Donald Trump. I think he should be,
but I can be fair to you.
Prosecuted, but I can put my personal feelings aside and reach a judgment in this case. Sure.
Wow. And as you sat in the trial, did the jurors stare at you? Did you look at them?
No, most of them didn't have the courage to stare at me. I gave them the Sicilian death stare, So I would look at them, and they would avert my gaze.
They would look. They'd look away.
Well, the judge did a 55-minute harangue at sentencing, where she looked at me and she said, "You have been convicted of lying to cover up for Donald Trump." Well, first of all, I wasn't even charged with that, nor was I convicted of that. But even she could not hold my gaze.
So
the same judge, by the way, who ruled against the families of the 4 men killed in Benghazi in a wrongful death suit. The same judge who incarcerated Paul Manafort in solitary confinement for 1.5 years prior to his being convicted of anything.
How long was your trial? How many days?
It was about 10 days, I think.
10 days.
I mean, since they wouldn't allow me to offer any defense, it went pretty quickly.
It's like a sensory deprivation chamber and sit in court for 10 days.
In essence. And of course, because I brought a Bible with me every day, I was mocked. I was relentlessly mocked.
Mocked by the media?
By the media, sure. There's no question. A very young pastor who had become a friend of mine, who'd attended one of my book signings, who I kept in touch with, just was relentless, just pounding on me about restoring my faith and being, being redeemed in the blood of the cross. And he said, "Look, this is too heavy a burden for any one man. You got to turn to Christ. You got to turn back to the church. You're a Catholic. You believe in God, don't you?" And I said, "Of course I do." He said, "Well, then now is the time for you to turn this burden over to Christ." So he arranged for me to meet with Franklin Graham, who was doing a revival in Boca Raton. And Franklin Graham was very generous with his time. He spoke to me for a while, and I told him that, look, I'm angry. I'm frustrated. I'm drinking too much. I'm worried about what's going to happen to my wife if I'm unfairly incarcerated. I don't know where she's going to live, how she's going to survive. And he said, I said, maybe you could talk to the president for me about clemency. Remember, I'm thinking like a Politico. Mm-hmm. And he's saying, well, I'll see what I can do about that. But let me give you a better piece of advice. You need to confess your sins. You need to get right with God. And if you do that, I think that he will lift you up. I think he'll protect you from your persecutors. And in the end, I think I escaped the deadly snare that Robert Mueller and Adam Schiff and Andrew Weissman set out for me only because I returned to the church.
While you're in this court case, while you're in trial.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I realized at a certain point that I was going to be lynched. There was no chance of a fair trial. So I really did restore my faith, started going back to church. I started praying very fervently for a just result. All I wanted Trump to do is realize I was being persecuted because I refused to lie. They had nothing on me. There is no Russian collusion. They kept saying, you communicated with Guccifer 2.0, who was a Russian intelligence asset. James, my 28-word communications with the persona of Guccifer 2.0 on Twitter direct messages took place 3 months after WikiLeaks had already published all the material. So chronologically, this communications is meaningless. It proves nothing whatsoever.
Did you talk to any reporters? They usually sit in the back benches of the courtroom. Did you engage in conversation during the trial with them?
Well, I think they were mostly enjoying themselves. It's hard to rank them, but the Washington Post is probably the worst newspaper in the country, followed pretty closely by the New York Times. And of course, the CNN folks who, by the way, they got an award for being outside my house. The White House Correspondents Association gave them an award for their incisive investigative reporting. They got a tip from Andrew Weissman. It's right there in black and white.
On July 10th, 2020, President Trump commuted your prison sentence before you were scheduled to report to prison, correct?
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Tell me about that.
First of all, they wanted to send me to a prison in Georgia, which made no sense because generally speaking, the Bureau of Prisons sends you to the prison. It's relatively close to where you live, so your family can visit you. But they picked a specific prison in Georgia where they insisted that there were no COVID cases. Now, I was 68 years old at the time. I have a lifetime history of asthma. And they were sending me to this prison because they said there were no COVID cases. An African-American woman who was the head of the prison guards union either saw this on TV or she read about it. Somehow she contacted one of my lawyers and said, this is a lie. There's 200 COVID cases here. There's many more tests that we don't have results from. It was very clear the idea was to send me there to die, and I probably would have died had I gone. But 48 hours before I had to turn myself in, the president commuted my sentence. And here's the interesting part. Then that Christmas, days before Christmas, the 23rd, I believe it was, of December, he gave me a full and unconditional pardon. Try to find that on the internet. If all the stories will say Stone's sentence was commuted, almost none of them will cite the pardon like it never actually happened. But if you want a copy of my pardon, you can go to stonezone.com and go to the store, and I will sell you an autographed copy.
Stonezone.com, autographed copy of the pardon. Why?
Or your T-shirt, or a T-shirt, or your T-shirt.
Why is that not on the internet?
I suspect it's because it's exonerating in a way, it's vindicating in a way. So you can find many stories. I have to keep correcting reporters who say Stone's sentence was commuted. Now, a pardon, you have to accept the pardon, and it is technically correct that when you accept a pardon, you're admitting guilt. But the alternative was to die in a COVID-invested prison in Georgia, which I had no real interest in. That had a kind of finality to it that I didn't really like.
Did you, one of the things that happens to me, I think sometimes this process kind of hardens you. The process is the punishment. So when you got this pardon, did you feel justice? Did you feel vindication? Did you feel relief?
I certainly felt relief. I felt great gratitude, both because I had prayed fervently for this, and I really did believe. I really had become convinced that God would deliver. I knew that I would be saved. I knew it. I knew Trump would do the right thing. People seem to think I had some deal with Trump or assurance from Trump. I hadn't talked to Trump at that point in 2 years. So I went from talking to him virtually every day to talking to him not at all. My lawyers also had no communications from the president's lawyer, so there was never any guarantee that I would be pardoned. I had friends out there who were beating the drum, like Tucker Carlson, like Laura Loomer, a handful, Larry Kudlow, people out there saying, this case is ridiculous, Stone's done nothing wrong, the president should pardon him. But remember, I was still gagged. Now, the judge gagged me, this is interesting, because she said that my defense of myself might taint the jury pool. Okay, then why did she leave the gag in place after I was convicted, before I was sentenced, after I was sentenced, and right up
Taint the jury pool?
Right, that was the argument. She produced no evidence.
How is that more true in your case than any other case? That's
well, and how does the Washington Post and CNN, the dominant news organizations in D.C., how did that not taint the jury pool? But no, this was her argument that I couldn't defend myself because it would taint the jury pool. Even if you believe that, then why did she leave the gag in place after I was convicted, but before I was sentenced, and after I was sentenced, and just before I was supposed to report to prison? So she was violating my First Amendment rights throughout because she didn't want her conduct of the trial to be criticized. The fact that she should have thrown out my conviction based on the actions of the illegal actions of the jury forewoman, who, by the way, had run for Congress as a Democrat in Tennessee, and who was a protege of Donna Brazile. But we're supposed to believe that she can render a totally unbiased, non-political judgment on Roger Stone.
Is it going to always be like this? Is it going to continue to get worse, just the weaponization of the justice system? Is it going to get better? What is your prediction of the future?
That's a very difficult question. Anybody who says that the people who pulled off the greatest single dirty trick in American political history, the greatest single abuse of power, in which the full authority of the U.S. government and the capabilities of our intelligence agencies were used to try to undo an election. There are some who say, well, if we maybe we should let that go, because if they come back into power, they're going to be brutal against us. No, they're already weaponized against us. The Steele dossier was a fraud. The fact that they claim the DNC was hacked by Russian intelligence is a fraud. I think that you either dismantle them now, or yes, they will come back and they'll do the same thing all over again. By the way, it didn't used to be this way. I mean, politics was always partisan, but when I lived in Washington, when I was an active political consultant, I had friends who were Democrats. I had friends in the business who were Democrats. We ate together. We drank together. We teased each other. Sometimes we beat them. Sometimes we beat them. Sometimes they beat us. When they beat us, it was like, okay, I'll get you next time. This idea of destroying people, destroying their lives, destroying their families, throwing you in jail, it was never like this. This is a new thing. I think, comes directly out of the presidency of one Barack Hussein Obama.
That's what changed it, Barack Obama.
I think it changed everything.
Was it the Obamacare? What moment was when things really changed?
I think as soon as Obama becomes president, they decide that they want to fundamentally change the way the country is run, and therefore they need to not just beat the opposition, that would be us, they have to destroy us. So the fact that I had written a book on the Clintons' war on women, and the longest chapter on that book is on Jeffrey Epstein, because I read every word of the testimony in the cases of the women who didn't settle, who went on to sue Epstein. I interviewed Virginia Roberts Giuffre for 6 hours in 2 3-hour sessions. The idea that she committed suicide is ludicrous, out of the question.
And she's now deceased.
They tell us that she committed suicide. I don't buy it. But I do know how many times Bill Clinton was on the island from her testimony. I do know how many times he was on the plane because I had the FAA manifest records back in 2015. I do know that when Epstein's butler sold his phone book, his little black book, not everybody in the book obviously is guilty of some illegality, but the butler helpfully circled the names and numbers of all those he said were involved in sex trafficking or were material witnesses. In some cases, he would just write witness. Other cases, he would just circle those he said they were guilty. Bill Clinton, Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, Senate Majority Leader George Mitchell, Bill Gates, others.
Now, you were at the Turning Point. I was there with you on stage, and every person talked about Epstein there.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you about this because at the time, it seemed like, when I asked every person in the audience, do you think the Department of Justice is lying? And almost every hand went up when they said there's nothing to see here. So there does seem the base is very upset. And I don't know if the issue is going to go away. And the way the president's been talking, what is your reaction to the current state of affairs with Epstein and the administration?
Well, I can tell you definitively, only because, first of all, I was physically there in those days. I was working for Trump. I was living in New York. I never met Epstein, but I saw him from across the way in a ballroom at a charitable event full of people. And this is a time when the president was dating Melania before they were engaged. And they had some social interaction, but it is benign. Everything about their relationship is known. When the president says it's a hoax, he's not saying that Epstein was not a child sex trafficker. It was the Trump Justice Department that charged Epstein in 2019 with child sex trafficking and conspiracy to engage in child sex trafficking. What he was saying is all of these records have been in the custody of the Southern District of New York and in the New York office of the FBI. These are two hotbeds of Trump hate. These people hate Donald Trump. And therefore, there was a high probability, which we saw almost immediately, that the records had been salted with quote-unquote evidence against Donald Trump. That's when the Wall Street Journal produced the famous birthday card. James, who types a birthday card? Who types a birthday card and then signs it? Answer, nobody. It's a fugazi. It's kind of obvious. So I think that's what he was saying. And I love to see these Democrats jumping up and down saying, I want full disclosure on Epstein. So do I. You know what's going to prove? Bill Clinton was on the island at least 4 times. Epstein imported 2 16-year-olds for his amusement. That's in Virginia Giuffre's testimony. And he was on the plane 26 times. Many times ditching his Secret Service detail.
Do you think there are Republicans on that list?
Not that I know of. I couldn't find any of them on the FAA manifest, and I couldn't find any of them in Epstein's phone book. Donald Trump's in the phone book, but he's not among those whose names are
How
certain.
about compromising material used as blackmail? Do you think that exists?
See, here's what I think happened. I think and I think we know this. There's no question that when they raided Epstein's home in New York, and they raided the island, and they raided his ranch in New Mexico, and they raided his apartment in Paris, we can see them taking out DVDs and hard drives. Those are in the custody of Mr. Wray's FBI. I think they were switched out. So when Kash Patel, who I know very well and who I have a very, very high regard for in terms of his integrity and his knowledge, when he says we don't have any video evidence of Epstein or anyone identifiable abusing children, he's telling the truth, because that material was destroyed and it was replaced, I think, with just commercial, illegal Chinese child pornography.
Was the evidence that was destroyed, did that implicate third parties?
That'd be my guess. Sure.
Yeah.
I think Jeffrey Epstein. I had a source for my book, Steve Hoffenberg, who turned everything he told me turned out to be true. Hoffenberg had been the head of one of the largest Ponzi schemes in history, Tower Financial. The number 2 man in that operation was Jeffrey Epstein. So he trained Epstein. He went to prison. When he came out, he contacted me and he said, Epstein is running a child sex trafficking ring and he's going to be arrested for it. Now, I knew that he had already been charged in Florida, but the police chief here in Palm Beach did a 6 months undercover investigation and handed the state's attorney a case that involved the trafficking of 33 underage girls. Also handed him a case for statutory rape of 21 underage girls. So the police chief, Michael Ryder, who's an honest man, was shocked when the state's attorney came back with 1 charge of solicitation. James, that's like walking into a bar and trying to pick up a hooker. It's ridiculous. So that at that point, Ryder, the police chief, goes to Alexander Acosta, the U.S. attorney in Miami, who has responsibility for Palm Beach. He conducts his own investigation, and then he rubber stamps the state charge, and he seals the entire case. Now, a lawyer I know was involved when Acosta was appointed Secretary of Labor under Trump's first term. First of all, no one ever told Donald Trump that Alex Acosta was the prosecutor who gave Epstein a pass. I have no idea why Reince Priebus didn't tell him that.
What year did Acosta do
That would have been 2017.
during the first term.
During the first term. So why no one told the president that, I don't know. But they said this guy's a Hispanic. Given the possibilities of the Republican Party to expand in the Hispanic community, he'd be a great cabinet. No one ever tells him, oh, by the way, this is the prosecutor who gave Epstein a pass. I'm sure the president was unhappy when he learned that. And then during the confirmation preparation sessions, a friend of mine who's a lawyer, whose name you would recognize, a guy who's in the Federalist Society, they're doing a motorboard, they're practicing confirmation, and they say, so Alex, what are you going to say when they ask you why you handled the Epstein case the way you did, why you gave him a pass? And Acosta said, it's very simple, I'm going to tell the truth. The CIA came to me and said he was an asset, and I was to seal the case. There it is. I think that's what happened.
Yeah, we have the stone cold truth. Trump and Epstein, the recycled smear. Recent weeks have seen this vicious assault on President Trump, distorting the facts about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk. I listened to much of this book, The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. I just want to read one quote from this book and then ask you a question about this, and then ask you a question about Nixon.
Sure.
This is from Lyndon Johnson, The Man, Chapter 1. I didn't know a lot about Lyndon B. Johnson.
Quite a colorful character.
Quite a character. He very descriptive language about him when he started to smoke again, and his hair got long, and he was unkept. But this is something that you write. Lyndon, quote, nothing could obscure the picture. Lyndon Johnson was an overbearing, coarse, ruthless, sociopathic, low-life, power-mad monster. He was a consummate politician, therefore could charm people when he had to, but the mask could easily slip and often did. Is that not true of many politicians, or was he worse?
No, he was worse. I attribute in this book at least 18 murders to him before he got to JFK. Murders to cover up corruption, murders to cover up voter fraud in his 48 election. He was very definitely a sociopath, a functioning lunatic. By the way, in the oral histories of his aides, Bill Moyers, George Reedy, his press secretary, even they refer to him as a lunatic. So, for example, the plastic bubble top on Kennedy's limousine is removed on November 22, 1963, not on the orders of the Secret Service, not on the orders of JFK, on the orders of Bill Moyers, who's working as an aide to Vice President Lyndon Johnson. And Moyers, who's an ordained Baptist minister, says to the Secret Service agent, who I interviewed, get that goddamn bubble top off of the limousine. Now, the bubble top's not bulletproof, but it's opaque, so you couldn't get a clear headshot if the bubble top was in place, and it had just rained.
What got you motivated to focus on this issue?
I'd been a Goldwater zealot, so I knew Johnson was a crook. The Bobby Baker scandal, the Billy Sal Estes scandal. Those are his motives. In other words, by November 26, 1963, he's on the verge of being charged in two massive scandals, two corruption scandals. Bobby Baker is the Secretary of Senate. He's a bagman. Billy Sal Estes is a flamboyant Texas wheeler dealer who has these huge federal agricultural contracts, and he's kicking back to LBJ. So Johnson knows he's on the verge of being dumped from the 64 ticket, and he's probably going to face federal charges and go to prison. That is his motive. Now the means, he convinces Kennedy to go to Texas to bind up the wounds between the Bourbon, more conservative wing of the Democrat Party and the progressive wing of the party. And then it is his henchman, John Connally, then the governor of Texas, who says, well, the motorcade has to drive through Dealey Plaza. Now, Kennedy's going from the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport to the Merchandise Mart, neither one of which is in the city of Dallas. So why is the motorcade going in and out of the city of Dallas? Well, to take Kennedy through Dealey Plaza, where they violate the Secret Service manual. The car comes to a full stop, creating the opportunity for John Kennedy to be shot from both the front and the back, as we now know, by multiple shooters in an elaborately orchestrated plan to destroy his presidency. And so Lyndon Johnson can avoid prison.
Avoiding prison, that was the primary motivation.
Well, Drew Pearson, who is without any question, the most influential columnist of the time, syndicated columnist, has a column for publication on November 23rd, a Sunday, that says that Johnson took a massive bribe to deliver a defense contract for General Dynamics. That's the end of LBJ. That column gets spiked because LBJ is president by the close of business on November 22nd, 1963. So his motive is to avoid prison and complete political ruin. Now, I'm not alleging in my book that Johnson's acting alone. The Central Intelligence Agency is deeply involved in Kennedy's murder. We now know that from the hearings that my friend Anna Paulina Luna has conducted in the Congress. Organized crime is definitely involved. The House Select Committee on Assassinations declares that in their final report in 1987. Big Texas Oil's deeply involved in this plot. So many people had their own individual motives for Kennedy's murder, but one man is the common spoke between all of them, Lyndon Johnson. And I use fingerprint evidence just to prove that at least one of the shooters is Malcolm Mac Wallace. That's who's shooting from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. He leaves his fingerprints there. We know they're his prints because he was convicted of murder in Texas in 1951. He killed a man who was trying to blackmail Lyndon Johnson. He went to trial. He was represented at trial by John Cofer, who's Johnson's personal attorney. He's convicted of first-degree murder, and he gets probation in Texas for murder. He's the shooter from the 6th floor. There's 6 eyewitnesses who identify a man who meets the physical description of Malcolm Wallace, a medium build, balding, glasses, expert marksman in the Marine Corps. He is the shooter from the 6th floor. But there are, as we now know from the new documentary put out by Paramount, there are shooters both in front and in back of Kennedy. He shot from both the front and the back, and that is concealed. The doctors now, some 60 years later, all admit, yes, we saw wounds consistent with these being shot from the front and the back. The wound in his throat, which we're told is an exit wound, is an entry wound. They perform a tracheotomy immediately, so you can't tell. All the doctors see a blowout wound in the back of Kennedy's head that would indicate that he was shot from the front. But by the time his body gets to the Bethesda Medical Center, that has been patched. In Texas, by state law, you have to have an autopsy when there's a murder. Kennedy's body is removed at gunpoint by Secret Service agents in a face down with the Texas Rangers, so they can remove his body, and the autopsy is not done in Texas. It's done in Bethesda, Maryland.
Johnson also driven by power a lot. You read about that in the book. I took that from the book.
Yeah, I mean, I think he takes the vice presidency with a plan to kill Kennedy almost immediately. He steals the Secret Service manual and gives it to his lawyer to begin laying this plot. On Inauguration Day, Bobby Baker, who's Johnson's right-hand man, Secretary of the Senate, his bag man, is standing next to Ted Sorensen, who really wrote Profiles in Courage. John Kennedy neither wrote nor read Profiles in Courage. It was written by Sorensen.
I read that book recently. I'm like, I don't think Kennedy wrote this.
He didn't even read it. Sorensen read it.
Yeah.
And his father.
It's a well-written book.
Yes, but Ambassador Joseph P. Kennedy, the partner with Frank Costello and all the bootlegging going on in the northeastern United States, pays for the Pulitzer Prize. But Sorensen is standing next to Baker. Now, Johnson and Kennedy have a bitter rivalry. And Johnson is responsible for breaking into Kennedy's doctor's office in New York City and releasing, just ahead of the Democrat convention, the fact that Kennedy has Addison's disease. Robert Dallek, who calls himself a historian, has blamed that on Richard Nixon. Nixon had nothing to do with that. That was Johnson's doing. So there's very deep hatred between the Kennedy camps and the Johnson camp. But Sorensen, who's the chief speechwriter for JFK, turns to Baker and says, well, after Johnson's sworn in as vice president, he says, well, congratulations, Bobby. And Baker says, John Kennedy will die a violent and premature death. And he storms off. There it is, right there.
Imagine if that was on camera. And this is another quote from the book. We have it on the screen behind you. Taken seriously, the supposition that Johnson was behind the plot to kill Kennedy is the key that unlocks the gate to the greatest of Johnson's crimes, the knowing of a futile war, that's the Vietnam War, that would eventually claim more than 58,000 American lives. So the other thing that struck me about reading about this was just the philandering of Kennedy and Johnson. I didn't know about Johnson's philandering.
Johnson was a notorious womanizer. As he famously said, I get more pussy in a week than John Kennedy gets in a year. That's a direct quote.
Was it true?
Well, Kennedy, as I make the case in the book, Kennedy is a genuine war hero. I mean, he's very badly injured when his PT boat is cut in half by a Japanese craft. He swims for hours with a rope in his teeth, dragging a wounded comrade to safety. He's a true hero, but he's in horrific pain for the rest of his life. He gets addicted to methamphetamine because he is seeing Dr. Max
It was steroids
Jacobson.
and methamphetamine he was injected.
Right.
Steroids meaning testosterone or
Steroids meaning crystal meth.
Crystal
meth. Early proprietary blend of crystal meth, which at that point is a doctor in Manhattan, Dr. Max Jacobson. So I like Dr. the Beautiful People. He's attending Marilyn Monroe, Joe DiMaggio, Frank Sinatra, Leonard Bernstein, Pablo Casal, Maria Calais, Nelson Rockefeller. All these people think that they're getting a proprietary blend of vitamins and enzymes that make them feel good. No, they're being shot up with meth, which is why JFK is so randy, why he is, in horrible pain, but he's still chasing 18-year-old interns in the White House.
When did that start happening with Kennedy?
I think it's certainly during his presidency, because Robert Kennedy finds out about it, has the FBI lab do an analysis of what this substance that Kennedy's being shot up with, goes to his brother and says, this stuff is going to kill you. You can't do this. And he says, I don't care if it's horse piss. It makes me feel good.
Right.
So, and I think that this is how the deep state rationalizes the murder of Kennedy. My God, the man's a drug addict. He could give away the store to Nikita Khrushchev. If you look at the manifest, which is in the National Archives, of those who flew to the summit with Kennedy at Vienna, you'll find the name of Dr. Max Jacobson on the manifest. He's with Kennedy. There's a terrific book on this called Dr. Feelgood. You can still find it. It's very heavily documented. So I think Kennedy is probably addicted at that point. The Secret Service has certainly told the intelligence services. But it's also important to recognize it's not just about Vietnam. It's also about the Bay of Pigs, because the Bay of Pigs invasion was a horrific failure. But it's also about the Cuban Missile Crisis, because everything you've been told, brave Jack and Bobby faced down Nikita Khrushchev, none of that's true. As we learned 50 years later when they declassified the documents, we agreed to secretly remove our missiles from Turkey and Italy, NATO missiles, in return from a pledge from Khrushchev to remove the Russian missiles from Cuba, which we don't really know whether that happened or not, because there's no on-site inspections built into this agreement. So the Central Intelligence Agency's motive is very clear. They think Kennedy botched the Bay of Pigs invasion. The original invasion plan called for 29 Panamanian flag bombers flying out of Panama to provide air cover for the men storming the beaches. That is canceled by the CIA the day before the invasion. Nobody tells Kennedy. Then Curtis LeMay, the head of the Air Force, goes to Kennedy and says, our men are being destroyed on the beach, Mr. President. There's only one way to save the day. That's to send in the U.S. Air Force. And Kennedy said, wait a minute. I approved the invasion so it looked like an indigenous uprising of Cubans, not a U.S. invasion. So he won't approve the use of the U.S. Air Force. And this is where he gets the deep enmity of the CIA and the Pentagon.
Kind of transitioning to Nixon here. We got about 20 minutes left. Another thing that's happening, and this is admittedly not an area that I know a lot about, Middle East in regards to Israel. There does seem to be I don't know if it's a schism, but just some disagreements about how to approach the state of Israel.
Yes.
These days in the Republican Party. And I wanted to play a clip, team, if we could pull it up, of Richard Nixon talking about Israel. My team thought it was an interesting clip to play, and then maybe play 2 minutes of this and get your reaction to this, as well as your thoughts on the current state of play with the Republican Party in Israel. Go ahead.
It isn't a question whether I felt it. The fact is that American Jews support Israel. And I understood that. And the fact is that every Jewish prime minister that I have known has enlisted American Jews to bring as much pressure as possible in the political process on American presidents. That's understandable. I don't object to it. Now, a president must not go along with it on occasion, because let me explain something about what is called the Jewish lobby in this country. In the first place, Jews, understandably in the United States, because of what happened in World War II, because of the Holocaust, are going to be put first priority on the survival of Israel. Now, as good Americans as they are, they believe that America's survival and security is directly related to Israel's. In other words, their belief is that being for Israel first means that does not mean you're putting America second, because they think it goes together. An American president, however, has to approach it in a different way, in my opinion. He's got always to think first of what is best for America. And that's true whether it has to do with the Israelis, or whether it has to do with the Irish, or the Germans, or what have you, or the Poles, etc. Usually what is best for America is also best for Israel, and vice versa. But on occasions, for example, an American president must make a decision that does not, in effect, give the Israelis a blank check. And one example of that is a decision that I made. I decided early on in our administration that we were going to seek good relations with Egypt and others of Israel's neighbors. Many of my Israeli friends didn't like that because they wanted a special relationship with Israel and Israel only. But I have always said that Israel's interests are better served to have the United States a friend of Israel's neighbors and potential enemies than to leave a vacuum which the Soviet Union would fill. I still believe that. I think.
All right. So your reaction to that, and then your state on the current affairs.
There's several pieces here. There is no question that John F. Kennedy is opposed to Israel having nuclear weapons. That is absolutely, and that he wants AIPAC to register as foreign agents. And this is very contagious. Lyndon Johnson gives them the right to have nukes 24 hours after he's sworn in as president. Is Israel directly involved in the assassination? It's something I'm researching right now. And if I find enough to make that case, I'll do another chapter for the book that you have. It's too early for me to say in my research. I've collected a lot of material. I'm still working my way through it. They certainly have the motive. That's not proof. That's just a motive. It is Richard Nixon, of course, who saves Israel from unilateral destruction in 1973 over the objections of Kissinger, over the objections of the national security apparatus, over the objections of the Pentagon, over the objections of every aspect of his own administration. In the 1973 Yom Kippur War, there's a failure in Israeli intelligence. The Israelis finds himself under attack by the Syrians and the Egyptians. They're running out of ammunition. Their backs are against the sea. Golda Meir asks Nixon urgently for help, and Nixon makes a unilateral decision to airdrop $39 million worth of lethal aid to the Israelis, which saves Israel. Now, you can listen to the White House tapes, and he says a number of disparaging things about Jews. But as Golda Meir herself said, what matters more, deeds or words? Mm-hmm. Another $60 million in lethal aid comes by boat. So Nixon unilaterally, over the objections of Kissinger, a Jew who is his national security advisor, saves Israel. I think that what he says is exactly right, and you've seen Trump, I think, exercise this. The Israelis were not all that happy about the Abraham Accords, where we essentially, the Syrians, the Lebanese, the Saudis, get a special relationship with the United States. And then secondarily, I think the president was very judicious in the way he approached the question of nuclear weapon developments in Iran. We don't have boots on the ground. We don't have a long-term commitment to war. Not a single American service person lost their lives in this surgical effort to try to destroy nuclear weapons, which the Obama administration, for some reason, believed would improve the situation in the Middle East. So in the end, and look, I'm more of a Ron Paul Republican when it comes to foreign policy. I'm not an isolationist, but I am a non-interventionist. I don't like war, the endless foreign war that the Bushes kept pushing us into. I think in the end, the president made the right decision. It was a balanced decision. It was not a decision to do nothing, but it was also not a decision to commit us to an endless foreign war.
What do you just make of just the cultural conflicts right now towards Israel, like the Nick Fuentes thing, the Tucker? I mean, just all of it. Just the people, the base seems to just have such disagreement about how to approach Israel. What do you make of that politically for the Republican Party?
I think it's politically, it's interesting. We still don't get a very large percentage of Jewish voters, no matter what our position is.
The Republican Party.
Republican Party. Trump, I think, probably hits a high watermark.
What is that, roughly? Rough numbers.
It's hard to say, but I think we ended up with somewhere around 23, 25%.
For Trump.
Yeah, and they're the most conservative Jews, of course. The more casual Jews continue to vote for Democrats, and I think continue to vote against the interests of Israel. I think it is yet to play out.
All right. We got about 15 minutes left. And I think we have a picture of Roger Stone and Donald Trump. Your longtime friend says it since 1979. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's a good photo, by the way.
That is
when was that?
That was after I was pardoned. My wife was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, very aggressive stage 4 cancer, which she has survived. And once she got, the doctor said she was all clear. The president who had attended our wedding in Washington, D.C. at the Willard Hotel, President Trump and his then fiancée, Marla Maples, had been at our wedding. They famously had a fight in the lobby of the hotel where she threw her engagement ring at the president.
Who threw the engagement?
Marla Maples threw it, who's a good friend of mine.
Marla's a second guest of the show. Yes, indeed.
She's great.
She's a great person.
She's a great person and a real fighter for health freedom, someone I like very much.
This is another picture. Throw the picture of, I don't know what year this is from.
There's just before the wedding.
That's the wedding.
Yep. There's a famous picture of Donald Trump after my father. He was the first one to dance with my wife. So after he learned that my wife had been cured of cancer, he invited us to Mar-a-Lago, which is where that picture was taken.
Have you seen that? I think you and I talked about that movie that came out. I forgot the name of it.
The Apprentice.
The Apprentice. And you were portrayed in that movie, and you had a comment to me about that. And now
a couple things. I mean, first of all, I'm much better looking than the actor they had playing me. Secondarily, I've never worn a Speedo in my life, nor would I ever wear a Speedo.
This was a scene in the movie where you're in a swimming pool and you come out in a Speedo.
Which is ridiculous because anyone who knows me, I would never wear a Speedo. I'm much better dressed than they depicted me in the movie. But they correctly say that I may be the first or second person in the country who comes up with the idea that Donald Trump has the stature and the courage and the stamina and the independence to be not just a great presidential candidate, but be a great president. I realized this in 1988, and I began pushing the idea then. The only person who sees this before me, ironically, is Richard Nixon. Nixon and Trump meet in George Steinbrenner, the owner of the Yankees, box when the season opens. And I'm working for Trump at that point, but I'm friendly with the former president. I'm doing some political chores for him as well. And Nixon calls me the next day and he says, "Well, I met your man, Trump." I said, "Yes, sir. What do you think?" He said, "I'm just telling you, if this guy ever gets in politics, he could go all the way." I said, so you think he should like run for governor? He says, no, I mean all the way. And of course, the New York Times has published this letter from Nixon to Trump in which he says, Mrs. Nixon saw you on the Merv Douglas show. And she said that if you ever get in politics, you'll definitely go all the way. And I just want you to know that I completely agree with her. It's a very warm letter. They had a very warm relationship. Today, President Trump says to me, because it's so antithetical to his character, he says, why did Nixon quit? I understand why he quit. I would never quit under fire.
You mean quit?
Resign
Resign from the presidency. Yeah.
I said, well, there was no alternative media then. There was no internet. So you had 3 television networks. You had a handful of influential news magazines, Time, Newsweek, Life, and so on. They're monolithically against you. You had no platform from which to mount a counterattack. And when Nixon tries, remember when he famously says, the people have a right to know whether their president's a crook. Well, I am not a crook. They use that against him. They use it to mock him. It's ineffective in his efforts to defend himself.
You know, as a college student, I read a book called The Closing of the American Mind by Alan Bloom. And the first sentence of that book was, this is in the 80s, written in the 80s. I read it in 2003. Students are taught that 2 things are evil, Richard Nixon and Adolf Hitler.
Yes.
Why, just existentially, why do people hate Nixon so much?
I really think that has to do with his being correct about Alger Hiss. Alger Hiss was a high-level State Department figure in the Roosevelt State Department. Nixon believed that there was evidence that Hiss was a communist spy. Hiss was Harvard educated. He was very erudite. He was one of the elites. Nixon came from Whittier, California. His old man was a grocer.
Up from dirt,
as he would say.
Or as he said.
And the whole Washington establishment told Nixon to back off. Allen Dulles, John Foster Dulles, who was Eisenhower's Secretary of State, Allen Dulles, who was his brother and the head of the CIA, they all tell Nixon to back off. But Nixon's instinct is that Whittaker Chambers, who had been an editor at Time magazine, who had come forward and said, I was a communist, I was a member of the Communist Party, Alger Hiss was in my cell, and I passed him government documents. It was Nixon's belief that Hiss was a spy. He pursued it. Hiss ultimately would be convicted of perjury for lying. 40 plus years later, when the Soviet Union falls and we get the KGB records, guess what? Alger Hiss was a Russian spy. But that anti-communism and the fact that Nixon turned out to be right brands Nixon for the rest of his career.
It was almost like contempt towards Nixon for calling it out correctly.
And for being a hardline anti-communist.
Yeah.
And then secondarily, there is his campaign in 1950 against Helen Douglas, which I think is unfairly depicted as a particularly dirty race. It was, but on both sides. He called her the Pink Lady because he took her voting record and he compared it to the voting record of the only Communist Party member of Congress, Vito Marcantonio, who was elected in New York City. And they voted the same about 80% of the time. Nixon pointed that out in a very effective flyer. It was printed on pink paper. It was a very, very rough campaign, but politics ain't beanbag.
Is that your quote? I've heard you say that before.
Probably was me who said it. But this is where he gets the nickname Tricky Dick, because he ran a very aggressive campaign. But let's be very clear about how meteoric his rise is. In 1945, he's released from the Army. He has no job. He has a law degree. He goes around to all of the blue chip, white shoe law firms in New York and Washington, and no one will hire him. He records that he's on Wall Street. He's looking out the window. There's a ticker tape parade. He sees Dwight Eisenhower riding by. The ticker tape is being dumped. It's a huge public event. 6 years later, he's Dwight Eisenhower's running mate. He goes from being unemployed to being the candidate for vice president of the United States in 6 years because he goes back to California. He runs for Congress in 1946. He's elected. He serves 2 terms in the House, runs for the Senate in 1950, wins an open seat. He's only senator for 2 years when he's selected for the ticket in 1952. So to go from nobody to being nothing to being vice president of the United States for 2 terms in 6 years is an incredibly meteoric rise.
What do you attribute that to? What was his greatest strength there in that meteoric rise?
Persistence, grit, determination. I think born of a hardscrabble background. I mean, he pulled himself up with his own bootstraps. He saw 2 of his brothers die of tuberculosis. He was the survivor. Also, he was selected for the ticket because of his anti-communist credentials.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, Eisenhower had defeated Senator Robert Taft of Ohio, who was the favorite of party conservatives. So they needed to balance the ticket with someone with anti-communist credentials. And Nixon was the person they selected. Then there was a smear against him by the New York Post. It was then that was a liberal owned journal, claiming that Nixon had a fund financed by a bunch of California millionaires, and it was being used to supplement his lifestyle, which was false. But they tried to dump him from the ticket. He survives that by going on TV in the famous Checkers speech, in which he says, everything I have, I've earned honestly. I did take one thing, however. It was a little Cocker Spaniel dog that a man in Texas sent to my daughters. And I don't care what they say, we're not giving the dog back. It's a little schmaltzy, but it saves his career.
Going back to The Apprentice, Roy Cohn, the attorney, the Stone's rules. Now, I don't have them in front of me, but one of the rules was admit nothing, deny
everything. It's admit nothing, deny everything, launch counterattack.
And it was one of Roy Cohn's, or did you come up with that first? Did he come up with that? Did you guys?
I think coordinate? That all of Stone's rules have been appropriated by the script writer. So Gabe Sherman wrote the screenplay
for this movie, The Apprentice.
Do
we have a clip, guys? Is this a clip?
Attack. If somebody comes after you with a knife, you shoot him back with a bazooka. Okay? Rule 2. What is truth, Tommy? What is truth? You know what's truth? What you say is truth. What I say is truth. What he says is truth. What is the truth in life? Deny everything, admit nothing.
That's what you just said.
What's true? What I say is true. And third of all, the most important, no matter how fucked you are, you never, ever, ever admit defeat.
All right, good. So how many of those are similar to your rules?
I think they're all identical to my rules. Did I get those ideas from Cohn? Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I'm not sure he verbalized them the exact same way I did. So I saw them from observance rather than being told them or being taught them. But I think Trump and I both learned them from the same guy. Cohn was a force of nature. He was an ardent anti-communist himself. He was a warrior. And I will say this, in the movie, the actor who plays him does a brilliant job, really captures his mannerisms, his idiosyncrasies, his verbal and physical tics. The guy really did deserve an Academy Award.
I thought he did a good job there.
He did a great job.
Yeah.
The storyline is, of course, false. The idea that Roy Cohn and Donald Trump had to threaten the head of the tax abatement board in New York City with exposing his homosexual background is a complete fabrication and a lie. Typical.
It seemed
Hollywood
a little far-fetched when I watched it. It was an entertaining movie, but doesn't mean it's nonfiction.
It's fiction.
A couple quick last questions here because we're just running out of time. Present day outlook for the current situation. Well, actually, no. We have a story you just broke on your Substack. Can we pull that up, guys? And I just wanted to give you the opportunity to talk about this. This is a story that you've done on a Republican representative and Cuba. Let's pull that up. This is bingo. Representative Mario Diaz. I apologize for saying this, but I've never even heard of this man. What he's a Republican.
He's kind of a Republican. He was a registered Democrat until the day he ran for Congress and became a Republican.
He was a registered Democrat before he ran for Congress.
Yes. So you have in Miami a cottage industry of these people who've dined out on being anti-Castro, but it's largely rhetoric. So, for example, Carlos Jimenez, the former mayor, now a congressman. He's the head of the Maritime Security Subcommittee of the House Transportation Committee. He has a hearing regarding a huge defense contractor called Crowley, which is Florida-based, but he never questioned them about their activities in Cuba. Crowley has ships going into the largest port in Cuba. It is a major security risk. But he never criticizes Crowley, which I wrote in a column. He never questions whether Cuban intelligence is using this access to learn about our trade routes or to get other defense information. And then more recently in interviews, he pretends like he never heard of Crowley when he conducted a hearing with one of their executives. Mario Diaz-Balart, he's at the same hearing. He doesn't have any questions about it. And then you look on the FEC records, you find out that Crowley's Political Action Committee has given a substantial amount of money to Mario Diaz-Balart. So all I'm saying is you have these members of Congress, virtually all of them Republicans, who hold themselves out as great critics of Castro because it's great for raising cash, but in terms of actually impacting the authoritarian regime and improving the lives of the people in Cuba, you know what they've done? Nothing. It's all rhetoric.
So it's about money.
It's all about money.
All about, and in politics, is it? I've been told it's about money, power, and sex. Is that one of those three usually motivates people?
Well, you know what I say: never miss the opportunity to either be on television or have sex.
Never to be on television or have sex.
Yes.
And,
actually, I stole that from Gore Vidal, but it is
Gore Vidal.
It's in my rules book.
And money, power, and sex are kind of interrelated to a certain degree. So what's next for Roger Stone?
I'm writing a book about the attempted assassination of President Ronald Reagan because the true story has never been told. But suffice it to say that John Hinckley Jr., who's convicted of trying to kill Reagan, is crouching in front of Reagan, shooting from an upward trajectory. But Reagan was hit from above and behind. There's a second shooter. The CIA knows it. This book is entitled Bushwhacked: The True Story of the Attempted Assassination of President.
Bushwhacked.
Bushwhacked.
Is that
you kind of get the
idea?
You get the idea.
This is the other. Actually, I don't have I have the Clinton's War on Women. I have only the Kindle version of the Bush book. We didn't have time to get into. Are you an optimist? Are you a hopeful person?
I am. I think we're about to enter a golden age.
A golden age.
A golden age of peace, prosperity, security, justice, and law and order. In a very strange way, I think being cheated out of the 2020 election turns out to be a good thing, because now Donald Trump is much wiser, much more battle-hardened, has a much better understanding of how evil the system is in Washington and in the country. He has an all-star cabinet. He doesn't have quislings around him like H.R. McMaster or General John Kelly. These guys thought that their job was to stop Trumpism, to stop Trump from destroying the world. They didn't understand their job was to implement Trump's vision. Now you've got people who fully understand his vision and are set to implement his views. So whether it is Pete Hegseth, who I think is doing a great job, or Robert Kennedy Jr., who I think is doing a great job, or Tulsi Gabbard, who will be the first woman president of the United States, not necessarily in 2028, but someday, or Scott Bessent, who I think is a brilliant choice to be Secretary of Treasury, an outside-the-box thinker, a libertarian, a believer in cryptocurrency, a believer in gold. This is an all-star cabinet.
And loyal?
Every single one of them. And frankly, it's an all-star White House staff. You know, I'm tired of seeing people say, oh, Susie Wiles was a lobbyist for Pfizer. No, she wasn't. I've known her for 30 years. Throughout her entire political career, she has always been with the outsider. I worked with her for Ronald Reagan against George H.W. Bush. I worked with her for Jack Kemp against George H.W. Bush. I worked with her against the sitting attorney general for Rick Scott when he was elected governor. In 2016, she could have been for Marco Rubio. She could have been for Jeb Bush. She chose to be for Donald Trump. So I think she's the glue that allowed Trump to run the most effective presidential campaign in our history, and without any doubt, the greatest single comeback in history, because on paper, he should not have been able to do what he did. And he won every swing state. He ran a masterful, extremely well-financed, but also well-plotted out campaign, meaning who wins is not about who has the most money. Who wins is about who spends their money most effectively and can plan for the long term. This is one of the reasons why I think Susie Wiles has done a tremendous job for the president.
I met Susie Wiles when we did the story on the CIA, and they were withholding information from Trump, and Susie Wiles told Trump he should comment on it, and he did. Last question. We have undercover reporters everywhere. We're doing investigative work every week. What do you think should be exposed? What needs journalistic investigation on video? What do you think a priority there is?
That's an excellent question. I mean, there's so much right here in Florida. I'm very disturbed about the story about Ron DeSantis and his wife appropriating $10 million from Medicare with the help of our appointed attorney general. I find that very disturbing. But even the Broward County Sheriff's Office, we have an appointed sheriff, appointed by Ron DeSantis, who turns out to be affiliated with the largest, most radical mosque in the county. Turns out to be a big fan of Black Lives Matter. I'd like to see somebody go undercover into the Broward County Sheriff's Office.
The Broward County Sheriff's Office.
It's the largest sheriff's county in the United States with over 6,000 employees and a budget of just under $1 billion.
And for those who are not familiar with Florida, where's Broward County?
It's Fort Lauderdale.
Fort Lauderdale. Well, I'm a new resident of Florida, so that's not too far.
All politics is local.
All politics is local. And some of the best stories that we've done are local stories. Learned that from Andrew Breitbart. Roger, we're out of time. Thank you so much. It's great to see you.
Great to be with you, James. Thank you.
What is your price? Because if your price is not your life,